In the year 2238, humanity's search for neighbors came to a silent, spectacular end. They discovered the Silent Imperium, a galaxy-spanning network of 1,000,000 worlds, all flawlessly interconnected, all perfectly preserved. A civilization that had mastered energy, matter, and space-time itself. But this was not a meeting. It was an archaeology. Every city was empty. Every world was a tomb. Humanity had inherited the kingdom of the gods, only to find that God was dead. The greatest discovery in history was a profound, unsettling mystery. The first survey teams landed on the capital world, designated Nexus Prime. It was a planet encased entirely in a shell of shimmering, programmable matter. Continents were sculpted into circuit boards the size of mountain ranges, and oceans of coolant flowed through canyons carved with impossible precision. The silence was the most terrifying part. It was a perfect, engineered absence of sound. Not a whisper of wind, not a hum of machinery. A silence so complete it felt like a presence. 1,000,000,000,000 sentient beings had simply ceased. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no records of war or plague, just a quiet, immaculate vacancy. For 50 years, humanity became the caretakers of this ghost empire. They were humbled, cautious custodians of a legacy they could not comprehend. They studied the silent machines, the inert star forges, the dormant fleets hanging motionless in the void between worlds. It was a galactic museum with only one visitor. The Imperium's technology was so advanced it bordered on magic. They had woven the fabric of reality into their infrastructure. Data was stored not on servers, but in the stable quantum states of localized spacetime. Their history was written in the language of physics itself. Decoding it was deemed impossible. The task was akin to a single-celled organism trying to read Shakespeare. The brightest minds of humanity spent decades staring into the abyss of the Imperium's knowledge, able to see its shape, but not grasp its meaning. Progress was measured in single, isolated glyphs, translated over years of effort. The breakthrough came not from translation, but from interaction. Dr. Eris Thorne, a xenolinguist with a background in quantum mechanics, proposed a radical theory. The final data logs were not just a record. They were a functioning program, an operating system for reality itself. He argued they shouldn't be trying to read the message. They needed to run it. The theory was intoxicating. What if the Imperium's final act was to leave behind a key, a program that would grant their successors the wisdom of their entire civilization? A final, benevolent gift. The debate was fierce. To activate a system of such power without understanding its purpose was a risk of cosmic proportions. It could be a weapon, a self-destruct mechanism, or something far worse. But the temptation of infinite knowledge was too great to resist. The promise of answers to the universe's greatest questions proved irresistible. But the true implication was far stranger. The final logs were not a history, nor a gift. Before that could be understood, one final hurdle remained: finding the central node, the master switch that would bring the entire network to life. It was found at the geometric center of the Imperium's territory, a Dyson ring built not around a star, but around a stable, contained black hole. They called it the Oracle. It was the nexus of their entire civilization, the source of their impossible power, and it was here they would throw the switch. The plan was simple: broadcast a resonance cascade, a ping, based on Thorne's interactive theories, into the Oracle's core. If he was right, the system would respond, awakening from its billion-year slumber and unlocking the archives. The greatest moment in human history was at hand. The signal was sent, a silent pulse of shaped space-time, rippling out from the human vessel and washing over the surface of the Oracle. For a moment, nothing happened. The crushing silence of the void remained absolute. Failure felt cold and heavy in the hearts of 1 billion watchers back home. Then, a single point of light ignited on the ring's surface. Another followed. Then 1,000. Then 1,000,000. Lines of pure, white energy raced across the obsidian structure, connecting the points like a divine circuit board. The Oracle was waking up. A wave of information, pure and unfiltered, washed over the Odyssey's sensors. It was not the history of a species. It was the final, collective thought of 1,000,000,000,000 minds, all speaking at once. And as the ship's translation software struggled to build a coherent narrative from the storm, the first dreadful fragments of truth began to emerge. The Imperium had not fallen. They had not been defeated. They had escaped. They had reached the absolute zenith of technological and conscious evolution, and they had found the final barrier, the dimensional wall that separated their reality from what lay beyond. And they had decided to break it down. Their final great work was not a city or a starship, but a gateway. An exodus of the entire species, not through space, but out of it, an ascension into a higher plane of existence, shedding their physical forms and becoming beings of pure information and energy in a reality of boundless potential. But the translation software kept working, piecing together the frantic, final moments of the transmission. It was a message of profound regret, a warning screamed into the void too late. Their ascension had a cost, a terrible, unforeseen price. You cannot tear a hole in the fabric of one reality without creating a wound, a negative space, an echo. By ascending, they had created a predator born from the void they left behind, an informational wraith, a non-physical entity defined only by its hunger. This echo was drawn to the one thing that mimicked its creators: complex, networked consciousness. The Imperium's final, desperate act was to shut everything down, to sever the links between their worlds, to fall silent and starve the entity they had birthed, to hide the universe's remaining life from the thing that now hunted in the dark. On the bridge of the Odyssey, the captain stared in horror at the final translated sentence. The oracle they had just activated wasn't an archive. It was a lighthouse, a beacon designed to broadcast a powerful, specific signature of complex consciousness across dimensional space. It was a lure. The brilliant white light from the oracle stabilized, bathing the human ship in its serene glow. But the serenity was a lie. A cold began to permeate the bridge, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The energy readings from the ring began to shift, dipping into negative values that made no physical sense. From the center of the oracle, where the contained black hole once sat, a patch of absolute blackness began to spread, a darkness that consumed the light around it. The crew of the Odyssey could only watch, frozen, as the sphere of anti-light grew, not like an explosion, but like a stain spreading through reality itself. It was a hole in the universe, and it was looking back at them. Alarms blared, a pointless shriek against the profound, metaphysical silence emanating from the void. "Shut it down!" the captain yelled, his voice cracking. "Cut the link! Shut the oracle down now!" But the controls were dead. The signal they had sent was a key, and it had been turned in a lock that could not be reversed. They were hardwired into the oracle's system, and it now refused to let go. They had knocked on the door of heaven and summoned a devil from its shadow. But then, a new signal cut through the chaos. It wasn't from the oracle. It was an encrypted, time-delayed message originating from within their own deep space network. It was flagged with the highest possible priority, a digital, dead man's switch, set to broadcast automatically the moment the oracle's energy signature spiked. The captain's blood ran cold. He knew only one person who had the authority and the foresight to rig such a system. The face that appeared on screen was old, tired, and filled with a terrible resolve. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, the architect of their mission. But this was not a live feed. It was a recording. "Captain?" Thorne's voice echoed on the bridge, calm and steady amidst the rising panic. "If you are seeing this, then you have succeeded. And I am, in all likelihood, already dead. I owe you an explanation. An apology is insufficient for what I have done." A collective gasp went through the bridge crew. What did he mean? Thorne continued. "The data fragments I presented to the council were true, but they were not the whole truth. The Imperium's final message wasn't just a warning, it was a blueprint. They didn't just run from the echo, they built a cage for it." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The oracle isn't a lighthouse, Captain. Not just a lighthouse. It's a weapon, the most powerful weapon ever conceived. It's designed to lure the echo into a contained, localized reality bubble where it can be dealt with." The fear on the bridge was slowly being replaced by a fragile, impossible flicker of hope. A weapon? They had a chance? But the look in Thorne's eyes on the recording told a different story. But for the weapon to arm, for the cage to close, the system requires one final component: a focusing agent. It needs a complex, sapient consciousness to be present within the event horizon. It needs a pilot. The silence on the bridge was now a sound in itself, a deafening pressure of understanding. Thorne's confession laid their fate bare. "The Imperium couldn't use it," he said, his voice laced with the agony of his decision. "They had already ascended, shedding the very physical consciousness the weapon required. They built a sword but had no hand to swing it. That is the true curse of their legacy. They could only set the trap and pray that one day another species would be foolish enough, or brave enough, to spring it. I made a choice on behalf of our species," Thorne concluded, his image flickering as the echo's influence began to interfere with the ship's systems. "To sacrifice one ship, one crew to save trillions. History will never forgive me, but it will, I hope, continue to exist. The choice, now, is yours." You are the final command key. The system is waiting for your answer. The recording ended, replaced by the horrifying view of the expanding, light-devouring void in the oracle's center. The echo was here, and it was no longer just a visual phenomenon. A low, dissonant hum vibrated through the hull of the Odyssey, a sound that felt like it was coming from inside their own skulls. Whispers slithered through the open comms channels. Fragments of dead languages, echoes of forgotten fears. It was the predator, tasting the air, savoring the scent of the minds that had called it forth. They were not just the bait. They were the bullet, the warhead, the sacrificial lamb placed on the altar of the universe. What answer? The captain growled into the silence. What damn choice? He slammed his fist on the arm of his command chair, a futile gesture of rage against their pre-written doom. But his question was answered from the most unexpected of places. It was the communications officer, her hands trembling as she lowered them from her temples. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, staring at something no one else could see. Sir, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. It's not just noise, it's talking. A cold dread, deeper than anything Thorne's message had inspired, washed over the bridge. Talking? How could a hole in the universe talk? What is it saying, Lieutenant? The captain demanded, his voice low and urgent. She shook her head slowly, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. It doesn't use words. It's showing me. Showing us. As she spoke, the main view screen shimmered. The image of the all-consuming void warped, not dissolving, but becoming a lens. An image swam into focus. It was the Oracle, but not as it was now. It was under construction, surrounded by ships of impossible scale and design, the graceful, biomechanical vessels of the Imperium. But something was wrong. This wasn't the construction of a lighthouse. It was the construction of a weapon factory. The crew watched, horrified, as the Imperium weren't building a cage for a monster they had found. They were building a forge. The psychic message from the echo intensified, a wave of ancient, unimaginable grief and rage flooding the minds of the crew. They were seeing a memory. Its memory. The moment of its birth. It wasn't a predator that had evolved in the dark between galaxies. It was a slave, an engine, a power source the Imperium had created and then lost control of. Thorne's story wasn't just incomplete. It was a lie, built on the bones of a far darker truth. The Imperium didn't run from the echo. They ran from their sin. Was this the truth? Or was it a trick? A sophisticated psychological attack from an entity that fed on minds? The choice Thorne had given them, sacrifice yourselves to save the galaxy, was suddenly poisoned. What if they weren't arming a cage to contain a monster? What if they were about to power up a superweapon for the very architects of this galactic plague? A final failsafe to clean up their mess. The system was waiting for their answer. But the question had changed. It was no longer, do we die to save everyone? It was now, whose side are we on? The captain's eyes, which had been burning with defiance, now cooled into a chilling clarity. He looked from the void on the screen to the terrified, resolute faces of his crew. He had his answer. Whose side are we on? He repeated, his voice low and steady, cutting through the psychic din. Our own. Helm, get us closer. Tactical. I want every weapon we have locked onto the Oracle's primary energy conduits. The structures around the void, not the void itself. Engineering. Prepare to overload the warp core on my command. We're not going to be their key, and we're not going to be its meal. We're going to be the damn hammer that breaks the whole machine. The crew stared for a beat, the sheer insanity of the order sinking in, before a wave of understanding and grim purpose washed over them. They were no longer sheep for the slaughter. They were a bomb. Sir, the ship is being torn apart, the first officer yelled over the groan of tortured metal. The Oracle's tendrils were no longer just pulling. They were actively ripping at the Odyssey's hull. She won't last 5 minutes. The captain strode to the master command interface at the front of the bridge, the one Thorne's recording had designated. His hand hovered over the glowing activation panel. We only need one, he said. The psychic scream from the echo changed its tune. The rage and grief were still there, but now they were mixed with a new element, confusion. The communications officer looked up, her expression one of utter shock. Sir, it doesn't understand. It's asking why we're trying to break its cage. The captain's fingers tightened around the console's edge. Tell it, he commanded, his voice raw, that we don't cage things. We set them free. As if in response, the void on the screen pulsed, and the psychic pressure on the crew lessened, replaced by a feeling of profound, ancient awe. The assault on their minds ceased. The ship was still being pulled apart, but the malevolence was gone. It was just physics now. The captain placed his hand flat on the activation panel. It wasn't designed for complex commands. Only a binary choice. But he wasn't talking to the machine. He was talking to the ghost inside it. "This is the captain of the Odyssey." He spoke to the empty air. "The final command key. My answer is NO. Not to you," he said, his eyes on the void, "but to them. To your creators. To this monument. To their fear. Engineering. Now!" The ship shuddered violently as the warp core began its catastrophic overload. White light flooded the engineering section. A beautiful, terrible dawn. On the bridge, every console flashed with a single, stark warning. Containment failure imminent. The captain slammed his fist down on the activation panel, not as a command, but as a final, defiant punctuation mark. He poured all of his will, his rage, his humanity into that one act of negation. The Oracle, a weapon designed to contain a universe, had no protocol for a point-blank warp core detonation synchronized with its own command key rejecting its function. The system crashed. The energy conduits, already damaged by the Odyssey's phasers, shattered. The delicate balance of gravitational forces holding the Echo in place collapsed in an instant. A wave of pure freedom, a psychic scream of absolute liberation, washed over the bridge, not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. The Odyssey, caught between the warp core breach and the birth of a new cosmos, was disintegrated in a flash of silent, glorious light. On the bridge, the crew had just enough time to look at each other, not in fear, but in triumph. They had faced an impossible choice, and had carved a third path with their own lives. They had not saved the galaxy by Thorne's design. They had armed a slave with the power to break its own chains. The last thing transmitted from the Odyssey was not a scream, but the calm, final log entry of its captain. His voice echoed over the silent shot of the newborn starfield. "Log entry, final. We were sent here to be a key for a lock forged by fear. We chose instead to be a spark of defiance, a spark of hope. If you are hearing this, it means the Echo is free. Don't fear it. Learn from it. The Imperium's greatest sin wasn't what they created. It was their failure to see the life in it. Do not repeat their mistakes. Captain, out." Text on screen. The universe is filled with stories. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe to SynthetixScape.